We don't want to lock people out. Okay. Snooze to lose. Okay, your word today is personification. Yeah.
Oh, I have a question.
Sounds right.
Like the rewrite.
Mhm.
Would you want me to email you when we rewrite something or just like?
If you just resubmit it, I go through at the end of the month and I check everything, and so you should be fine. Yeah. Okay, personification is the attribution of human characteristics to something non-human. Attribution. Human characteristics. Something non-human. So you remember our metaphor box where we've got similes in here. And we also have personification in here. So personification is a kind of metaphor. It's a specific kind of metaphor where you are attributing human characteristics to something non-human. And I know you guys have been learning about personification for a long time now. So I've got an example of personification up here. I don't have a projector anymore, so I got to write everything today. Yeah, the surge yesterday, the power outage. Thank you. It's that kind of day, I guess. It messed up with the projector. So here is the poem. It's by Sylvia Plath, and it says, "I am silver and exact. I have no preconceptions. Whatever I see, I swallow immediately, just as it is, unmisted by love or dislike. I am not cruel, only truthful. The eye of a little god, four-cornered." All right, choose one line from that poem that you find interesting. The entire thing uses personification. So choose one line and that will be your example on the word of the day. Sorry, you can always change seats too.
If you want the first line, I'll just do the first one. I am silver and exact. And then I have no preconceptions.
Have you chosen your line that you find interesting? Okay, you talk about personification in writing, like when you're doing analysis, very similarly to how you talk about metaphors, where you're thinking about all of the physical characteristics that is presenting. So like, what does it mean to say that the mirror is not cruel, as though it is a human? And yes, it makes us see a picture, it paints that picture in our mind. There's all of that kind of stuff, but you're trying to think of the specific effect of this personification. Why would she compare the mirror to a little god, for example? So talk to the person next to you about your line. That means that you'll probably talk about two different lines, and that's great. Try and give lots of ideas with your partners or with your groups about what they could write under effects.
So what it talks about, whatever I see, because only humans. I did the island. So when we still listen to the pen, there's no more okay, well, I feel like whatever I say, I think it's kind of like,
I think like giving it like the eye, little god, is like seeing from this higher vantage point.
it's like really
I don't know.
There's the
All of
middle.
them have all mirrors.
And then also the smaller one, they just put that on like the person sees, you know, you're just like.
Whatever. Yeah, it just discriminate against.
Did you have so many good things to say about mirrors?
Besides the mirror.
All right, write them down under effects. What kind of effect does it have to say that the mirror is only truthful, not cruel? Why compare a mirror to a person at all? You could think about what kind of expectations someone might have looking into a mirror and how this is kind of either meeting those expectations or contradicting their expectations. Okay, and then you can put away word of the day. It's a fast one. Okay, quick review. Last time we talked about the body politic. You guys had kind of some similarities, some differences, but in general, I'm gonna kind of put where we had things. We had God up here. Usually we had like government and the rich and the clergy sort of in the top half of the body. Some people put the rich on the arms, and then we had the poor down here, kind of holding the body up. And then I don't know if you'll remember this. Yeah, who could forget? We've got the sinners, kind of that's giant compared to the size of the body. Oh, this body politic needs to see a doctor. But we have sinners, which we're like trying to say like it's very clearly separate from the body. Like the body does not want it to be a part of itself, these sinners. And then we talked about how Winthrop has this idea that they are all connected by love. So you've got, you know, the rich and the poor connected together who are connected to these leaders. So God might speak through the clergy and the governor, but then it kind of gets down here to the rich and the poor, and everybody's connected together. The rich give to the poor, and that creates a kind of dependency. And then the poor can kind of give the rich the opportunity to be blessed through charity. So they're all working together. All right, we also talked about how Winthrop doesn't want people to move spots. Like he wants the poor to stay right here, the rich to stay where they're going to stay, because that is preordained. It's God has decided you are going to be a rich person or a poor person. So you should respect God. You should stay in that position. Doesn't mean you should be unhappy. Poverty is not necessarily associated with unhappiness. It just means that's your spot. So figure out how to like live within that spot. Okay, that's Winthrop's idea. And then I had you read that paragraph from the Scarlet Letter. So this is our last day with the Scarlet Letter, you guys. It's very exciting. So open up to that paragraph again. It's in the conclusion excerpt. This is where we're. And it's the paragraph that starts, nothing was more remarkable. It's in the conclusion excerpt. It's Scarlet Letter excerpt 3 at the top. Yes.
Are we supposed to annotate the front side or just the back?
You were just supposed to talk about it with your group and figure out what he meant there. So yeah, it's just a note to yourself. So. Did everyone find it? No and yes. I don't know how to take it. Okay. I'm going to read the paragraph out loud to you. It's a long paragraph, but I want us to remember it. Nothing was more remarkable than the change which took place almost immediately after Mr. Dimmesdale's death in the appearance and demeanor of the old man known as Roger Chillingworth. All his strength and energy, all his vital and intellectual force seemed at once to desert him, insomuch that he positively withered up, shriveled away, and almost vanished from mortal sight, like an uprooted weed that lies wilting in the sun. I love that image. This unhappy man had made the very principle of his life to consist in the pursuit and systematic exercise of revenge. And when by its simplest triumph and consummation, that evil principle was left with no further material to support it. When in short, there was no more devil's work on earth for him to do, it only remained for the unhumanized mortal to betake himself whether his master would find him tasks enough and pay him his wages duly. But to all these shadowy beings, so long our near acquaintances, as well Roger Chillingworth as his companions, we would fain be merciful. It is a curious subject of observation and inquiry, whether hatred and love be not the same thing at bottom. Each, in its utmost development, supposes a high degree of intimacy and heart knowledge. Each renders one individual dependent for the food of his affections and spiritual life upon another. Each leaves the passionate lover or the no less passionate hater forlorn and desolate by the withdrawal of his object. Philosophically considered, therefore, the two passions seem essentially the same, except that one happens to be seen in a celestial radiance and the other in a dusky and lurid glow. In the spiritual world, the old physician and the minister, mutual victims as they have been, may, unawares, have found their earthly stock of hatred and antipathy transmuted into golden love. Okay, so you talked about this in your group and we talked about it briefly in class, but what is Hawthorne's biggest problem with Winthrop's body politic? Kaylee?
He really hates dependency and it's much more for individuals having their own lives.
Yes, if we're connected together by love, he's actually kind of saying, let's not be connected together in this way. This idea of mutual dependency, it prevents the individual from growing and discovering who that individual actually is. And instead, we're kind of like basing who we are on other people, and he does not like that idea. So he sets up this idea of hate and love being the same emotion. So do you buy that? Do you feel like hate and love are essentially the same thing? Or would you contradict Hawthorne there? Yes.
Well, when we were discussing this on Monday, Austin brought up this quote and it says, "You can't betray someone you hate, betrayal is born out of love." And I thought that was like pretty true. And I think the more you think about it, because like you obviously care for that person, but then like as things turn bad, it turns into like spite out of care for them.
Yeah, so maybe they're not, you're saying maybe they aren't the same thing, but that maybe one thing can turn into the other easily?
Yes.
Okay, Kaylee?
I would say that both hate and love have a certain element of obsession,
Okay.
but the other part of them is different. So like hate is like obsession with bringing them down. Like love is essentially like
Okay, bringing down, bringing up. Can we find a way to say that literally rather than sit with the ups and the down like metaphor? How would you say that love is like bringing people up? Because I really like that.
Well, like love has a very positive connotation.
Yeah, okay, so it's obsession, but like in a good way. An obsession, but in a bad way, right? It's maybe for you. Okay, yeah. Brennan?
Like they're kind of connected, like it's very hard to make someone who hates you love you, but it's really easy to make someone who loves you hate you.
Interesting. So it is easier, you're saying it's easier to make someone love you, hate you?
Yeah.
I feel like it's harder. If they love you, then it's harder.
Is it true?
But if you really, like, this reminds me of what you were saying, you can't betray someone unless like there was love to begin with, right? So it's like, if you are, this makes sense to me. So you might hate someone and you can be kind to them all you want, but they're just always gonna hate you, like who you are. But if you love someone and you do something really bad to them, it's easier to kind of flip to the other side. Addie?
You really need to help me with this thought process.
Okay.
I don't know how to like explain it. Okay, I feel like love is
Okay.
because love, I feel like it's almost, someone said this over the weekend, but someone said that was like at this engagement. They said that that she hates that he does that, but she chooses to love him anyway. Right? And so it's almost like conflicting his idea, but it's like love is hate because you hate the way it makes you feel.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, so there's something here about it being like very passionate, right? Either way, it's like a very strong emotion. And you're saying that it's almost like this idea like you wouldn't know what happiness is unless you had sadness. It's like you can't have one without the other, the love and the hate. And when emotions are this high, yeah, I would say like there is no one I hate as much as my husband sometimes. It sounds like, don't, oh, it's recorded. He doesn't watch my recordings. But yeah, for real, like if my best friend loaded the dishwasher wrong, like who cares? You know, I would just say, okay, that's the way you load the dishwasher, but my husband does it and it is like a personal affront to me. It's such like a cliche thing to get mad about, but it's real. So it's this idea that like those emotions are just so closely connected, and the higher love gets, maybe the higher hate gets too. That's a super interesting way of looking at it, Lexi.
I think one of the biggest differences is that love is more centered on the other person. It makes more sense for yourself.
Okay. So it's other centered. So what do you mean by hate being centered on yourself?
Well, you only hate someone if they've done something to you, so it's me, what's happening, sort of thing.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to love someone if it's not about you too? Like, look what they've done for me, but it's a good way?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's such a thing as like selfless love,
Yeah.
but there isn't such a thing as selfless hate.
Yeah.
Got it. Gracie?
I think like going to like what Addie said about like it being like the same emotion,
Mhm.
because I think that it is the same emotion, but it comes from a different place. Like it comes from like, yeah, like what we were saying, like a positive place or a negative place,
Uh-huh.
but it's the same emotion, you just use it differently.
Okay, cool. So like the uses are somehow, I don't know how to convey that on a list, but yeah, the uses for it are different. The uses for like how you are using it to kind of understand yourself maybe too. Claire?
So I like it was what I was gonna say is like similar to what you said about like your husband, like the more you love someone, the more you hate them. It's
Yeah.
like, both the emotions are very intimate, like in order because they're very passionate and like intense. So like you have to know someone really well to love them. Or because if someone like wrongs you just one time and you don't know them very well, you can brush it off. But if it's someone you have like an intimate connection with, then it's like more offensive.
Yes, I like that a lot. And it could be also more rewarding too on the left side. Yeah, Austin.
This is kind of going back to like once you love someone, it's like hard to hate them and it's hard to love them. But I feel like when you love somebody, you tend to see through rose-colored glasses and you kind of ignore like the bad things about them. But then once you see those things, then it's a lot easier to hate them. So
Yeah,
it's kind of
good.
just your perspective on the situation.
Yeah, I like that. So it's like you're going to, if you love that person and you're willing to see them through like a lens of love, then you're going to think about all the good ways you can see those same actions that you potentially could hate eventually. That's doomsaying, doomsaying. But yeah, Aaliyah.
I think that they both can tell you a lot about yourself because when you hate someone, usually what you hate is something that you hate about yourself. And when you love someone, usually it's because you have love for yourself, so you know how to spread it and like how to feel actual love.
Yeah,
But when you feel a lot of hate for yourself, that's what you channel it.
I like this. I like this idea that they are both self-centered and obsessive independent. How can it be both? Because you like have to depend on somebody else. It's like you can't have love or hate unless there is somebody else to love or hate, right? You have to have this other person. So it is dependent on that other person. And yet it comes from this place of like you being very like self-centered in some ways. When like the things I like about my husband are the things that I like agree with. So it's the things I love about myself too. That sounds awful, but it's true. Lucy?
It's kind of hard to keep up. I feel like we really can exist at the same time because the first thing I thought of when you said where you hate someone or like my versus with my siblings, because you know, as much as they're like as annoying as they are and how aggravated if something happens to them, I immediately like, you know, feel protective for them. I feel like
Right.
it's really
Yeah, right. And it is kind of at the same time, because it's even the things that they do that you hate that you would be protective of if somebody else was being rude about those things.
Like,
You know,
I
they-
can do that too.
Right. Right, you can't talk about my sister like that. Only I can. Patty?
Okay. I feel like if we were to just look at everything that's listed, but not define it as hate or love, we could fit all of them onto either or. Because I feel like we often try and find a full definition as of what love is, because especially we're like, oh, well, we love him, we love her, or whatever. But there, I don't really feel like there is a definition, more as what we're all feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that we can't really separate the two, because in the end, all of those fit under each.
That's what Hawthorne's arguing. This is a really good segue. That's what Hawthorne's arguing here. Your heart, when you're in love or when you're in hate, your heart beats faster. You get anxious around them potentially, like at least at first. You feel like you always want to be around them. Yes, when you dislike someone, you don't want to be next to them, but when you hate them, there's something satisfying about fighting with them and having them around, at least according to Chillingworth, you know? So there's this idea that on both sides, behaviors look the same. And yes, they feel different. I think we can all say, like, when I hate someone, that feels very different than the moments when I love them, even if it is the same person. And yet he's looking at all these similarities and he's saying, here we are saying that love is the positive, and like love is the thing that God wants you to feel, you know, body politic. God wants us to connect together by love. But he's like, it really feels very, very similar. It has so many similar qualities to hatred. And he says, both of these things are problematic. We don't really want too much of either of these things in our lives. Not the kind of love that Dimsdale has, at least. Kaylee, and then to Brennan.
I was just thinking of what the main difference is to me, and I finally came up with what it is.
Okay.
When you love someone, you want the best for them, and when you hate someone, you want the worst for them.
Ah, good. Want best for them,
You like want them to be happy, or you want them to be miserable.
want worse for them. I like that. I like that difference a lot. Yeah. Brennan?
So I guess like all this like combines like love-hate relationships exist.
Yeah. Yeah, do you guys have some of those, or frenemies? It's also a huge trope in like literature or movies, the like hate turns to love trope, the, you know. Yeah, exactly, all the Hallmark movies. I think we talked about that last year in class. Yeah. I think he's working with this idea here too, except it's in different characters. It's not like one transitions from one to the other, but he's looking at Dimsdale and he's looking at Chillingworth, and he says, wow, they both ended up the same way. In one, his love, like his secret love, caused him to wither away and die. And in one, his hate caused him to wither away and die. And so he's like, and when you consider Dimsdale, you consider his love for Hester, that's one thing. If that had been in the open, who knows what would happen. But if you consider his love for like his community and his love for his church, that caused him to like wither away and die. So he's like, let's not maybe be connected by this. And instead, what if we moved God from the head to the heart, and all of us just have connections to God instead? That's where Hawthorne's kind of coming from. If everybody can kind of decide for themselves, instead of depending on somebody else for their happiness and their well-being and just everything they do, what if they could just decide for themselves? So that's where we're kind of picking up with this idea of transcendentalism now. So I don't have my projector, so I'll need everyone to get on their computers and follow along on the presentation with me. It's kind of annoying, but we'll make it work. Oh, also I meant to like give you a teaser. We get to go outside today for 15 minutes and experience nature.
Where's the
Okay, so you go into Canvas, and under today's module, there's an assignment that I just published, so you might have to refresh if you were already there. It's called Class Recording September 1st and 2nd.
Yo, it's September.
I just refreshed it. I just published it. Yeah, is it there?
What?
Oh, I thought you said September 1 half. I was like, how is it half of the same?
It's half September.
Oh.
September half. What if we
I'll fix
measure
it.
it like
I'll
that?
fix it. That would be
Instead of being like it's 12
September
o'clock,
1/30th.
it's like half day.
Okay, you also want a piece of paper for this. I'm gonna make you take notes. So this just goes in your notes. I'm not making you turn it in. It'll just be part of your binder. The reason is because I'm gonna unpublish this, so you won't always have access to this PowerPoint. Okay, will you raise your hand if you haven't found the PowerPoint yet? Is it because it's not logging in or because you can't find it? It's just slow. Okay. Slow. Yeah, class recording September 1st and 2nd. And there's a super ugly slideshow called The Puritans and the Transcendentalists. What are these colors? Yeah.
It's so funny how like whatever grade you're in, like everything. Like the history we're learning about the Puritans.
Yeah.
I know, it works so well, right? It's because for 11th grade, which most of you are in 11th grade, it's American Lit. And then history is American history, so it matches that way. But I didn't plan it with anyone. Okay, when you take notes for this class, and I've got something like a PowerPoint, I very rarely make PowerPoints. I mostly do this up here, but you do not need to write down every word. At the beginning here, I'm going to be telling you about Puritans. It's going to be stuff that you have heard in history class or you've heard me say before, and you don't necessarily need to write it down. So you don't need to write down every word. Just write down the main points that you think are going to be important to you, right? Where you're being strategic with your note taking. So the beginning here. Go to slide number 2 now. So this is Puritanism. The main points of Puritan society that we want to keep in mind as we're going to learn what transcendentalism is number one, that idea that they were separatists, that they wanted to leave the Church of England. They didn't want to be persecuted anymore, but also they wanted to do things their own way, and they didn't want anybody else to interfere in that. So they want to go off and they want to be their own separate society, right? So they come to the United States, they want a very pure idealistic culture where they can like get rid of sin, and so they do not have that separation between church and state, because if the state can exile you, then the state can get rid of anything that the state feels like is sin. People exist for the glory of God. They are not like necessarily great beings on their own, but your existence proves that God is all powerful and God is glorious. And the main thing is that this isn't even on the slide, they believe in an idea of predestination. So this is what we've been talking about quite a lot with this book. Like some people are saved and some people aren't. If you're a Puritan, you're saved, unless you sin and everyone finds out about it, and then that was evidence that you were never saved to begin with, you know. But but God decides, and it's by having complete faith in him and faith that you are one of the saved ones that you live a good, happy life. But happy is a strong word. They really weren't big on happiness, the Puritans. They liked hard work. They liked self-discipline. They thought enjoyment was sin. So, you know, no Christmas, no birthdays, that kind of thing.
Where is it? I cannot find it.
Oh, it's under our module for today. So it's September 1st and 2nd module. And then it's class recording September 1st and 2nd. Okay, yeah, no problem. Okay, so that's the Puritans, and the Puritan, go to slide 3, the Puritan writing is like quite boring. Well, I mean, Winthrop has his sort of interests, like when we really think about it, but it's very practical. Like a lot of the Puritan writing is just about preaching and sermons. They didn't have much fiction. Like Puritans weren't really doing storytelling, writing like that. There are some Puritan poets. There is actually one of our very first African-American poets was a Puritan woman. And then another big Puritan that became a poet was named Anne Bradstreet. And they were very successful, but all of their poems, not all of them, but almost all of their poems are just like praising God. And so it's like kind of like a sermon, you know? So a lot of it is like just very utilitarian. It's very plain. And then the next slide, on slide 4, you get like some of these writers, John Winthrop, Jonathan Edwards, but then we're going to include Christopher Columbus there. He wrote a journal, William Bradford, etc. Okay, you don't need to write anybody down. Skip the Anne Bradstreet slide, and now we are on slide 6. Okay, here's where to start, you know, taking some better notes. Okay, so Unitarianism is an idea that broke off from very strict Christian sects. So they kind of went against this idea. The Puritans thought that people were born into sin. It's like Adam's sin, Adam and Eve's sin has followed you. That is what it means to be human. So you are born into sin, and it is up to God to decide to save you. The Unitarians said, no, we do not believe that. They said human beings, whoop, good thing I was wearing a mask. I just really like spit. Human beings are not inherently sinful. They're not inherently depraved. They're not born sinful. They're born pure. They are from God. Like God decided to make humans, and so therefore they can kind of partake in the same divinity that God has. Like they can sort of be blessed by God's divinity. So humans, through their work, could become more godlike. The Puritans were like, it doesn't matter what you do. God can save you or not, it's up to him. But the Unitarians were like, no, you can work hard to be a kind person and a charitable person and honest and all this, and that makes you more godlike, and that can kind of ensure your place in heaven. It's more contemporary idea of what most Christian religions believe now. But in one way they are different. They were really big on rationalization. So this movement kind of comes out of the Enlightenment, which if you haven't yet, you'll learn about that kind of period of history in history class too. But the Enlightenment was all about how human ability to think through and to reason is like really amazing, and that if we just sort of put our minds to it and keep thinking through problems, we can figure out the meaning of life. We can figure out how to solve all of life's big problems through our brain power. And the Unitarians really latched onto that idea. They loved that. And they said, so all of the stuff that happens in the Bible, all of, even the miraculous stuff, we can put our minds to it and we can reason through it, and we can come up for like a rational evidence for why that happened. So they weren't big on like faith, just for faith's sake. They weren't big on like the mysteries of the religion. They were big on like, here's what the religion is, and you can like say, you can find the evidence for it, and you can find like the way it matches up with science and so on. That's early. That's like end of the 1700s. So if the Puritans are like mid 1600s, Unitarians are like end of the 1700s. And then in the 1800s, beginning of the 1800s, this is when we start on transcendentalism. So click to the next slide. We're on 7 now. So the transcendentalists love this Unitarian idea that human beings could be divine, but they're not just saying that you kind of are inspired by God's divinity or that you can partake of God's divinity. They were saying human beings themselves are like a part of God, like we're an extension of God. If we were to use like that language in our culture, it would, like in this culture where we live in, it would be, you would probably say they were a child of God. That's the idea. So they're like, they are kind of, because they are like part of God, they have that godliness inside them. The transcendentalists, so they took it a step further. They didn't like that the Unitarians were saying that you could find rational reasons that God exists. They were like, yeah, good luck trying to find that. You know, people have been doing that for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they said there's something actually really admirable about not having that rationality, about just accepting the mystery for what it is and saying, yeah, it's mysterious, but I have faith in it. And because of that, like they weren't into this idea of proving things that happened in the Bible. And in fact, the early transcendentalists, a lot of them kind of rejected some of the stuff in the Bible. Like they were just like, you know, the Bible was also made by men. Maybe it was, you know, maybe those men were divine, but some of the choices that they made were historical and contextual. So they didn't put a whole lot of faith in the actual Bible. Instead, they were more, they had more interest in the divinity of individuals. Yeah. Claire.
So you said that like they talked about it was only that, so they're like they want the people.
They did. Sorry, I'm using man in this like really general way, like mankind.
Oh.
But that's one of the coolest things about them, and we're going to get to them. They were like our earliest feminists and also abolitionists. They were like, everyone's divine, women, Black people, everyone. Yeah. Okay, so that's the early years, and it's kind of like slowly, transcendentalism is like slowly creeping into the culture. 1820s is like around the time of the Second Great Awakening. So you can kind of see these ideas in like churches that are starting to form in the 1820s, like, you know, one prominent one around here. You can kind of see some of these ideas that are really important. But it is not until 1838, that's the next slide. Nope, go one more slide, skip eyeball walking and go to slide number 9. We'll come back to eyeball, I promise. So slide number 9, this is really where people like pinpoint, like this is where transcendentalism as a clear movement with a name gets started. 1838, this guy, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He might be America's greatest writer, honestly. Ralph Waldo Emerson gives a speech at the Harvard Divinity School. It's their graduation address. So these kids, these are master's students, graduate students. So they've been to 4 years of undergrad now, and now they're going to 4 years of grad school that is all about Christianity and like how to be good Christians and how to be good preachers and so on, like really study Christian teachings. And Emerson was a Unitarian pastor at one point, but he had left that a little while ago. He was thinking about what his actual beliefs are. And he gave this speech that was quite controversial. He said, church hurts people. He said, don't go to church. He also said, you guys are sitting there asking yourself, what would Jesus do? And you shouldn't do that anymore. You should just ask yourself, what would I do? Like, what would Dr. Borup do? Or what would Matthew do? You know, you should be asking yourself that instead. What would I do? And of course, like Harvard Divinity School, they are not pro this. This is sacrilege, complete sacrilege to say this. But he basically said, if you are divine, you are a divine person, then you can trust yourself. And you don't have to trust somebody else to save you because you are already divine. So if you go to church, that's you trusting other people. And it's really a distraction. You should be trusting yourself. And if you listen to what Jesus says and you're trying to follow him, he was divine, yes, but so are you. So you should be listening to yourself instead. So you could kind of see how that, I mean, you could definitely see how that would be sacrilegious, right? It's basically saying like you're as divine as Jesus. So yeah, the school, they didn't like this, but the idea caught on like right away. People in America especially loved this idea. They loved this idea that you could completely trust yourself and be reliant on yourself. He loved Jesus's teachings. Like he wasn't like anti Christ. He wasn't the Antichrist either. He was saying that Jesus can be a great inspiration to you for how to live a life divinely, but that doesn't mean that you should copy him because you yourself are divine. That makes sense. Okay. All right, then you can go back to walking eyeball. No, sorry, I'm gonna go to slide 10. Normally I can just do this. Okay, slide 10. So this is where this idea of transcendentalism comes from. It comes from the word transcendere, and it means to rise above or to pass limits. Think of your human self and as you exist in society as the limit. And your soul or your identity can surpass that limit. And when you surpass that limit, you kind of discover your own divinity, and then you get to this point where you're fully an individual. And the way that you can do that is you are inspired by nature. And Emerson thinks of nature as anything that's outside the self, but other transcendentalists took it literally and said, no, nature is nature, like the woods or the mountains. Yeah, Aaliyah.
Don't we have a lot of this like idea going on again, like right now with all like the spiritual?
Yes.
People are talking about your own divinity and like connecting with nature and grounding yourself, but also like this higher plane where you're not even, you're not stuck in this like suffering that everyone else is.
Yeah.
You've, like transcended.
Yeah. It's called transcendental meditation.
It's the same thing.
It's the same thing. Yeah, same idea. Yep. So his idea is go out into nature then and kind of meditate on nature. So observe nature, let it sort of like flow through you. Nature is absolutely divine. That is directly from God. And you are divine. So you want to notice the things you have in common with nature. You see like leaves on the tree and they're blowing in the wind and you're like, oh, how does that inspire me about how I can blow in the wind and I can respond to changes in the atmosphere and so on. And then you sort of get inspired by that and learn about yourself. It's very hippy dippy when you put it that way, but it's a really powerful idea because it's all about like, don't listen to anyone else, listen to you. So like right now you are all taking notes, right? Because I told you to. That would be the opposite of what the transcendentalists want you to do. They would hate that you are taking notes. Yeah. Unless you feel it in your soul. Like right now, are you like, yes, I really need to be taking notes on this subject?
Yeah, I always.
Okay, Abby, you're right. You're right there with me.
I just think he's a hypocrite because he's like, listen to me, don't listen to people.
I know they always get in trouble with that. All like the nihilists, all of them get in trouble with that idea. But yeah, so he's just like, he would not like the idea that I was teaching you in this way. Oh my gosh, he would hate this educational model. There were transcendentalists who were big on education actually. And this idea of sitting in separate desks, all facing me, the authority, while I am sitting like literally above you, like teaching down to you, that is like the opposite of what we should be doing. The idea that you're all on computers, like typing away, rote memorization, like just typing what you see on the screen, opposite. In fact, there's schoolhouses, they had schoolhouses, all the kids' desks faced the walls. So it went, they had around the, around the room and you just face the wall. And that way you're not distracted by other people, right? It's just you. And then as often as possible, they would take the kids out into nature and they would have like, experiences of the practical world that way. Not like teaching them to farm or anything, but like touch the dirt and what can you be inspired by? Yeah. Yeah. I think the teachers were trying to inspire them to like feel their own divinity. It didn't mean you didn't read books. Like it's great to be exposed to lots of different ideas, but it meant that when you read books, you didn't just believe everything you read as true. Yeah, so they'd have teachers, but their teachers were like really hands-off. Like it was a lot of personal study time.
You didn't have to study this.
I mean, if your whims told you not to, then you want to study. I want to too.
I want to like explore nature, see how.
So, but you're all still writing notes. Not all of you, but a lot of you are still writing notes, right? And that's his issue, is that society is putting so much pressure on you to be a certain way. There are consequences to following your own whims and your own inspirations in a society. If you were to stop writing notes and you don't get the second half, then when I quiz you later, there isn't actually a quiz, but let's say I did, you would fail the quiz. And under Emerson's ideas, like that's fine because that was your divine truth. Like that's okay for you to fail the quiz. Like you don't have to go to college, but like in a society, that's really hard to work out because like you got to get a job. You have to be like an accountant for an insurance firm so that you can have a family, and like it doesn't quite work. So you have lots of transcendentalists that are leaving society. Like have you heard of Thoreau and Walden Pond? He went to the pond and he built himself a cabin and he tried to live there alone for 2 years. Just get away from everyone telling you what to do. Because in this situation, like it's kind of impossible for you not to listen to me if you still want to pass the class and have, you know, the series of consequences that come from that. Yeah, Claire.
So were they like against getting jobs then, since you have the boss? Or did you just like self-employed?
Yeah, a little bit. I think they would be okay with it if you were able to like understand that was your own divinity, but like ideally they'd want you to be self-sufficient, completely self-sufficient, like off the grid type thing. Yeah. Now, ideally, and we'll get to Thoreau, but ideally that doesn't even work out ideally, right? Because Thoreau was living on this little cabin and he tried to grow beans and he tried to survive that way. But what he doesn't tell you in his book is that like every weekend or every other weekend, he'd go back into town and eat at his friend's house because he wants to eat a good meal, you know? So it's really hard to live the life the way they're telling you to live, but it's kind of like an ideal.
Was Thoreau transcendentalist?
Yeah, he was a transcendentalist too. Yep. And he also didn't say that in his book. So he wrote this whole book about living in the woods for 2 years. Didn't mention that his friends were feeding him that whole time. But it's a nice idea. So go back to walking eyeball. That's slide 8. So I love it. I want to get a tattoo of this really bad. Like that's been my tattoo idea forever. This walking like weird gangly eyeball. It's so cool. If I show up with one, don't be surprised. So Emerson didn't draw that, but somebody read Emerson's essay and drew this. So it's like directly inspired from this essay. And he basically says, I want to be a transparent eyeball. And what he meant by that is he doesn't want to fixate on human reason. He doesn't want the sensory object to have a brain that kind of like corrupts everything. Your brain is so full of ideas from all over society. Instead, he wishes that we could just be eyeballs, just observing things. I don't think he'd have problems with like any of the senses, but just be eyeballs and take it all in and feel what we should do. Like feel what is right. Because when we feel what is right, we are feeling what the divine wants because we are divine. And I keep saying divine, not God, because eventually not all the transcendentalists, but a lot of them were saying, we don't know if there's a God or not. So we're going to call it this oversoul. And in that way, it's a lot like new age spirituality, where it's kind of like the universe. It's this like, it's like it's a divinity. It's sort of like a more vague divinity. That doesn't mean though, there were Christians that were transcendentalists. It's not a religion. It was just a thought, a movement. Yeah.
Wait, so I don't know if it would like contradict each other, but like a Puritan like have, because it says it's not a religion.
A Puritan probably couldn't, because a Puritan is so dependent on what the clergy tell them is right and wrong. But other Christians, like Christians that believed that they were godlike, and there were quite a few during the Second Great Awakening, they could be transcendentalists and also part of their religion. Yeah. And a Puritan could, but I mean, the transcendentalist wouldn't have a problem if a Puritan was, but the Puritan would get kicked out. Yeah. Okay, go to the 11th slide now. This gives you just like a real clear bullet point list of the things they believe in. So 1, man is from God. 2, that means that since God is good, man is good, inherently good. And since man is from God and man is good, that means man can trust himself. And again, men, women, everybody. And so their biggest stress was on individualism. You can trust yourself. You can't trust anybody else. Self-reliance. If you can't trust anyone else, then you need to rely on yourself for all of your ideas. And intuition. It's not supposed to be a rational process. It's supposed to be a feeling process. I think that transcendentalism was probably the most important philosophical movement we've had in America. Because you look at that list of things: individualism, self-reliance, intuition. And I don't care where you are on like a political perspective. That's like 3 things that all like Americans value. right? Individualism, like doing things like that kind of promote the individual, not selfishness, but like I am my own separate person with valuable opinions and ideas. Self-reliance, like I don't want other people to have to rely on me and I don't want to rely on other people. And intuition, like let's make some, I want to make decisions, yes, with rationality. I'm not saying Americans are stupid or anything, but we also like, we really value making decisions emotionally too, and having like moral decisions that we're making. So do you agree with me or no? It's okay if you don't, but I feel like that's like a big part of our culture. Yeah, Leah.
Have they done like studies on intuition? Because I really feel like it's for like, have you ever just like sat there and actually listened to yourself and something just tells you like, yeah, or that something tells you
Yeah,
and you know that it's right.
I am sure.
And it's proven that it's right.
I'm sure, and I don't know, I think like a hardcore scientist would say, oh, that's because you're getting tons of little micro inputs that are helping guide your intuition, you know, but I'm sure they've done lots of studies on that. Yeah. Claire?
I'm sorry to talk so much.
No, I love it.
So, you know how you're talking about how like Americans grow on that idea? But like it kind of is, because if you like think about like capitalism and like our economy and what like built us, like capitalism is very like individual and like you're not relying on other people besides.
Yeah.
It's like kind of how our economy and our
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating because also a part of capitalism is like being dependent on people's demands too, though, and responding to demands. And same with democracy. Democracy kind of has both these parts too. It's like, yes, we value the individual's input and the vote, right? But we all have to work together to make the democracy work. So it's kind of got like, I mean, I don't think we're only transcendental, but I totally agree with you that like that's sort of the motive behind capitalism. Yeah. Lexi.
So something that isn't making sense in this.
Yeah.
is They're saying that you can trust yourself. But then why could you not trust other people if you're all coming from God and you're all really good?
Because that's a really good point. What would they say to that? They would say,
Who I know.
okay, that's all well and good to hear what they have to say. I think Emerson talks about this in the essay you're going to read next time. But he says it's all well and good to like hear what people have to say and be inspired by them and think they're interesting and like question that. But you can't fully just say, like, if I tell you something, you can't just say, well, you're the teacher, so I trust you. So even though I don't understand it, I'm just going to move forward, because you don't know if I actually am acting according to my divinity or if I just hate kids. Yeah, I think that's how he would respond. It's like, it's fine to like believe other people, but you really have to question it yourself first. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Here are the Transcendentalism. They literally made a club called the Transcendental Club. So cute.
Oh.
And so we've got Emerson, we've got Thoreau, you've got Alcott, which was Louisa May Alcott's father. So the woman who wrote Little Women, her dad is in this club. You've also got someone named Margaret Fuller, who was like real strong feminist, you know, early on. And then here are their concerns. They would love if you could trust everyone and we could be a utopia. Let's get outside of the influence of society and maybe we could do that, was their idea. They were for women's rights for the most part. They felt like everyone is divine, including women. In quotation marks there, you got free love. Yes, quite a few of them were totally into that idea of following your whims, including in matters of love. So they weren't super into being only attached to one person. You could get married, but like if your whims tell you find someone else, then go find someone else. They, for the most part, they were abolitionists. We read about how Hawthorne does not quite fit into that, definitely. They were all about the environment, because preserve the environment so that you can go out and actually feel what nature's like. And then, like I said, they were big on education. They felt like education as it was too constricting. So they wanted kids to be able to learn for themselves, learn in a more free way. Okay, and yeah, one more slide. this is just kind of an interesting tidbit. There was a place called Brook Farm. So they were way into this idea of utopianism, right? So they tried to start this utopian colony called Brook Farm. And it was all about communal living and everybody helping out and everyone sort of like being able to live closer to nature. But the problem is when you say follow your whims, very few people's whims tell them to like go clean out the barn or harvest the crops. All of these guys' whims were telling them, let's just think about ideas and talk together. So the farm did not work, never financially stable. But the reason I bring it up is because Hawthorne was one of the founding members of that farm. So he lived on Brook Farm for a while. Yeah, didn't quite work out. I mean, like most hippie communes. They don't quite work out in the end. And that is transcendentalism. So what we're going to do, you are going to take a piece of paper, something to write with and something to write on, and we are going to go outside, and you can go anywhere on the front of the school. So like spread out. You're not allowed to sit next to your friend. You have to be far away. You have to experience the loneliness.
The loneliness inside.
Yes, the loneliness inside of Claire. Sorry. You get out of experiencing
The loneliness inside.
transcendentalism. Huh? No, you'll be fine. Yeah, you're good. Okay, so we're gonna go out and yes, exactly. We're gonna feel the vibes. We are going to be inspired by nature. So remember what the goal is. Hang on. Your goal is to like make as many observations as you can about nature. So like, what does the wind feel like? What am I smelling? What am I seeing? What things are getting in the way of nature? Whatever observations you can make out there. And then eventually, this is kind of a free write. So eventually, you're going to start discovering things about, remember, your own divinity. So you're looking at nature, you're getting inspired by nature to discover things about yourself. And this is how you're going to discover what your real, true whims are. Do you want to break up with him or not? You know, that's how you're going to find out. So remember, you're spreading out, you're free writing. I am not going to collect these, so you can get as personal as you would like to on these. We are going to stay out there till 2:05. So at 2:05, I will yell out for us all to come in. If you can't hear me, just keep your eye on your watch. 2:05. Yeah, do it.
This seems kind of like a ploy to convert us all to trans.
Yeah.
Are we doing a call?
No.
This is supposed to go.
No, I promise I would not consider myself a transcendentalist. I don't think we're divine. I think we're vile.